these very kind words. You have heard a long story of what I've been doing, and I'm sometimes asked if I'm not going to retire, and I usually answer then that I've done that 3 times, I'm not going to do it again. So I could not, certainly not fail to join you tonight. I'm not going to give a lecture, but I will give you, because I'm sure you have been fed many solid lectures during this course, and I don't think I could add to the wisdom that has come. I see Lars Högberg, my old friend from Uppsala, who was the master of the drafting of the Nuclear Safety Convention in the IAEA and many other things as well. So I know that you have been given very good substance at this institute. I rather make some personal reflections. The first one is that I'm very happy to meet another class of the Royal Nuclear Association Summer Institute and be here at the time when you receive your certificates. This is in the US, they usually talk about commencement when they graduate from universities. It's a little funny because that's the end of school and the commencement. But when you think of it, I think it's very good because it's something you begin. You've gone through something and you begin a new stage. That's what you are doing. You are engaged in stages already, but here is a new stage when you have been loaded, recharged with energy and knowledge. I congratulate you on what you have learned during this course, and I also congratulate you on getting to know each other. I know that someone today was talking about networking, and it is very important in today's world to have the networking. It's a vast world, but you need to have the information from everywhere and have your bearings everywhere and have your friends in many places, and I have myself benefited from that enormously. So I think that's a wonderful feature of the course that you have had here. As Agneta said, I have been taking part in the university from the very beginning, the Oxford, and I've also taken part on 3 occasions here in Sweden. The second point I want to make is that I'm convinced that nuclear science and technology is not at the road's end. Despite the various attitudes that you find to nuclear power in various parts of the world. You have nuclear medicine, you have nuclear agriculture, you have nuclear industry, and you have inexhaustible nuclear power, generation of electricity and heat. So I think that you are already in a profession that is indispensable. And you should be aware of the value that you have, despite all the criticism and the fear and worries people may have, that you are an indispensable part of the modern industrial and intellectual society. And you are now taking over in the field of nuclear power, you are taking over. We are going into the generation 3 of the power stations, and we are also working hard on the generation 4. So we are entering a stage that is very exciting. The third point I want to make is that yes, we are here, we are at the Uppsala Castle. And maybe it seems a little exotic to you. To me, this is really like home. As Agneta said, I'm a student who wanted to make a little extra money. I guided tourists here, so I've been at this hall very many times. It's an impressive building, and what was the function of it originally? Well, in the 16th century, the people paid their taxes in kind, the butter and the milk and the grain, and then the king had many castles, and he roved around the country with his soldiers, part of his army, and stayed there for a while, and nibbled up on all that there was in the stores, and did a lot of other things too, justice and so forth. But then they moved. There was a pattern in Europe, not only here. So they came here to this castle and lived here for a while and moved on to another castle. It's an impressive building. And this very hall, Queen Christina abdicated in 1654. By that time, Sweden was a fairly stern Protestant country after the Reformation. And Queen Christina was the daughter of Gustavus Adolphus, who fought the 30 Years' War for Protestantism. She of all people converted to Catholicism, which must have been terrible if the old man had been alive. So this was the area. There's a big painting of her and a horse. She was a very intelligent woman, a very good sense of art, unfortunately, she took with her a great many of the Swedish collections of paintings to Rome, where she settled as a good Roman Catholic. But she was a very intelligent woman, and she did not feel at ease being a ruler as a woman. There were others who did, like Queen Elizabeth of England, yes, did, but Queen Christina never felt. She was very knowledgeable, she spoke many languages. You know, children, royal families in those days, they learned Latin from the age of 5, and she spoke a number of languages by the time she was 10. Anyway, she abdicated here. That was in the 17th century. Then it has become the residence of the king's governor for the region. And you saw downstairs, you saw a sculpture head of Dag Hammarskjöld. Well, Dag Hammarskjöld lived in this castle because his father was a governor of Uppsala region. So he grew up here, and he walked along the street here down to the school, and the ugymnasium. And I know exactly where I walked because I walked the same way. I lived for 17 years here in an institute across the park, the so-called English Park, all my childhood, and there are not many trees in that park which I haven't fallen down for in my young days. Well, Dag Hammarskjöld then went to this school, and he is now remembered here, of course. Now, it's also been other functions. There's been the water supply of Uppsala. It's been in one of the towers. I don't know whether it still is so, but it was. And tonight we can feel that this is a ballroom. It's the big function of the hall of the realm, and for many important occasions, and for the students, for the spring ball and so forth. So that's where we are. I also have other memories from this area. When I was a child, and I used to walk along with my father, walked up to the castle, and there were very good mushrooms around here. We used to pick them in the spring. And the slopes down here, down to the street, also plenty of snow. I have skied many, many times up from the castle and down to the streets. So much for the castle. Now that was my childhood here in Uppsala. My youth was more linked to the university. And the university is older than the castle. The university was founded in 1477. It was by the Catholic Church. The church provided the culture in those days, the reading, culture, and knowledge in those days. Latin was the language of the church, and Latin was also the international language of science. The Swedes who went abroad to study, they learned Latin, and the books were also in Latin they had. Theology was the main line. I don't think the university in 1477 cannot compare with what it is today, when you have all the faculties. In 1477 it was chiefly a theological affair. And there was a stern Protestantism that was taught in the end of the 15th century. It's only later that with the Enlightenment in the 19th century, then emancipation of thought came, and natural sciences began. Uppsala, as you probably have learned, was the home of Carolus Linnaeus, who was one of the fathers of botany, a great man of the Enlightenment period. And he wrote in Latin, as they all did in those days. Now theology is a very small part of the faculty, one very small faculty in the university. Sweden is a country that is thoroughly secularized. If you haven't noticed it before, we are. But it doesn't mean that religion is sort of passé. You have many free churches in Sweden, apart from the state church, which is Protestant. You also have many more Islamic people in the country. When I was young, one was not allowed to leave the state church without joining another Christian community. So you could become Catholic, but you could not become a Muslim believer. That was changed, and the tolerance has increased enormously in the country. Religion plays much less a role, but tolerance is fairly great, I would say. I went a few days ago to a medieval church for sightseeing in Uppland, an hour away from here. And it's very, very beautiful, beautifully restored, and could see the scenes of the Bible that are painted in the roof of it. There are no people. And I asked whether there are any religious services. Well, once a month, that was all. So that's, I think, a fairly typical sign of the country. Secularized, yes, but not without religion, and very great tolerance. Sometimes occurs to me that Catholicism and Protestantism were very, very sharp antagonists, and even 30 years of war was fought about that issue. And it reminds us a little of the enmity between Shia and Sunni today that still is on. And it perhaps gives some hope that, yes, this may be overcome, and they may show more tolerance to each other. Now, my fourth point is really Uppsala University and the importance of the role of science and technology, natural sciences. I myself did not choose science. I chose law, as Agneta revealed. I must confess that my feeling for chemistry and physics were not very good. Certainly my talent was not very good in that area. And I did what many youngsters at the age of 19 did when they don't know what to become, what profession to suit. They study law. Because law is an opening for many other areas, for the administration, for practice of courts, and lawyer advocates, and so forth. But very soon I knew what I wanted. I came out of school, my commencement was in 1946, and that was right at the end of the Second World War. We had been isolated during the Second World War. I can still remember the big piles of wood we burned in order to keep our houses warm in those days. So at the end of the Second World War, and with the peace coming, many young people like myself, they longed to see the world, they longed to come out after the isolation. And I also longed, as the others did, for how could we avoid another war? How could we get better organized peace in the world than the Second World War had shown? And then I decided that yes, the rule of law is an important part of it. It's not everything for peace, but it's a very, very important part of peace in society. Without the rule of law, it would be a very hard time to have peace in society. So I decided to specialize in public international law. And that's why I went to Cambridge, and that was then my career. And I must say, you are starting in, or in the beginning of your careers, and you're asking, what will you achieve in your lives? And I think there's a lot to be achieved in the nuclear sphere. Now, I felt in 1946 and 1950 that yes, there was a lot to be achieved also in the organization and improving of the status and the rule of law in the world. And I've been lucky in my life. I've been allowed and enabled to participate in much of the law making. And my first task was to participate in the drafting of a convention on the law of treaties. Well, treaties sounds maybe a little bit exotic to you, but treaties really are the contract between the states. You know what the law of contract means in national law. That's a very fundamental thing. And treaties is also very fundamental, because of course it forms the agreements between the states, bilateral-like contracts of business, but also it's the basis for international organizations. So how you conclude them, and the validity and the interpretation is an important matter. And then this was my first task, to take part in the drafting of this basic international law, the law of treaties. But then I took part in many other things. I was in Stockholm for the first UN Environment Conference. I helped draft and I wrote large parts of the Stockholm Environment Declaration. It was a policy declaration. It was law, not law, but a policy declaration. And it had great inspirational impact upon the further work and the further legislation and conventions in the field. I helped Alva Myrdal as a legal advisor at the Conference of Disarmament in Geneva. And I remember that we cut out a cartoon where a little boy says to another one, he says that if I survive, if I live on, I want to be a disarmament negotiator. It was something that never ends. And unfortunately, it hasn't come to much fruition yet. It's in a miserable state at the present time. I also took part in conferences on modernization of the laws of war. And sometimes people say, what is this but cosmetics? We behave as they like anyway. But if you ask those who have benefited from the law of conventions concerning prisoners of war or many other things, who say that those who are in the margin, they were very happy that the rules existed. And the latest part of my life I spent on the development of the nuclear infrastructure, you can say. And in that also, of course, the conventions. which is a very basic part of the international nuclear society. And Lars Högberg was here, who was the one who helped to steer the work on the Convention on Nuclear Safety. It's one important part of this. We had another convention on nuclear waste and spent nuclear fuel. We had conventions on liability and many other. We had the development of nuclear safety regulations, and of course we had the development of the whole safeguard system of the IAEA. This is part of a growing infrastructure necessary for the field of law, just as we need an infrastructure for our conduct of cyber, our cyber life. This is a modern world, and you have to catch up. The organization has to catch up and write the basis and the guidances in these fields. So I've been very happy to take part in that and spent many years from 1981 and still stay active in it. Now, let me turn to another aspect of the universities, and that is the role of science and research. And someone said that I admire the people who search for truth, and I'm a little worried about those who have the truth. And I think that's very well said, because we must always be at the search. There's never the last truth of anything. Research means searching again. Yes, we have a truth. We think we've come to the revelation, and we must act upon it when we are confident about that. We must act upon what we think is the truth, but never lose sight of, again, examining the basis for our conclusions. That's the research. And what we see in the world today is often very much at variance with this. We hear today about alternative facts. Alternative facts. Well, whatever fits your aim. And during the Iraq War, when I was at the United Nations, I remember that some of the people of the Republican Party said that we are now so powerful that we can create our own reality. Well, it was even more common to do something that they call spin, and which we are familiar with in politics. And I have a story about that. There was a Swedish fellow who used to appear in radio and television, and he was a great storyteller about the enormous pikes that he had caught, so 2 meters long and 20 kilos heavy, or elks that he had shot. And he was interviewed once, and the journalist asked him, don't you ever lie? And he said, lie? No, I never lie, never lie. But I admit that when the truth, there is not enough of the truth, then I add a little to it. But in this manner, you only get more truth than there is in reality. Well, I think this is a maxim that many politicians are using. And in some occasions, it's perhaps tolerable, and we don't read advertising, we don't read all political manifestos as promises on the Bible. But it can also come at terrible cost when you ignore the truth and you try to sell something that you are not sure is truth. The Iraq War was sold on weapons of mass destruction that we had warned as an inspector that might not exist. And the cost of that war was enormous. I remember it said that in New York that they cited Lincoln that said that you can fool some people all the time and all the people sometimes, you can't fool all the people all the time. It's a famous saying. But they say that they're home of advertising Madison Avenue. This is much too pessimistic a view. And I think that's how some politicians still are acting. But as I said, it comes at a terrible cost. And the cost of the Iraq War was horrible. Many years of anarchy. And I sometimes hear Blair or others say that, but after all, it was a good thing to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And I say, yes, it was a good thing getting rid of Saddam Hussein. But maybe we should ask the Iraqis, which would you have preferred? Tyranny and to anarchy? Which is the worst? And anarchy or tyranny. And I think the very sad thing about it is that it was not so much the Iraqis themselves which chose, but it was outside intervening states that chose. And I think it shows also the danger and the erroneous attitude of foreign interventions. It may take a long time to get rid of a dictator. Eventually biology takes care of all of us, but to leave it to foreign states to do away with it is not a problematic way. There are facts. It's not that there are just alternative facts, there are real facts. Everything is not a matter of opinion. Today is Thursday. It's not Friday, it's Thursday today. And critical thinking is a recognition of truth is indispensable. If you don't have a serious diagnosis, how can you have a therapy? And they didn't have a serious diagnosis of Iraq, and they didn't have a good therapy for it. Politics, of course, is a matter of values, and we must have values, and we have socialist values, and we have liberal values and conservative values. That may or may not be wisdom, but politics and the application of politics, the implementation of politics, must also be based on facts. You cannot simply create a society on the basis of these values. And I think you need a dossier. The government needs a dossier of real facts. And if they go away from this real fact, then we are in trouble. I think that's the role of the scientist, it's the role of technical people, it's the role above all of civil servants to provide the dossier of facts to the governments that then have to act upon them. And whatever political leanings they have or values they have, if they depart from the fact and ignore them, then we are in trouble. I think that's what's happened on the question of the global warming, where a number of people, an opinion in the United States, and some outside as well, in Sweden too, where they simply will ignore the fact and not recognize. Maybe one doesn't have 100% certainty about everything there. Certainly it is very often the case that we don't have 100% certainty. But we have to act upon the best knowledge that we have. And in the global warming, this is certainly to take action. Fortunately, the world has done that in the Paris Agreement. The progress must be based on science. The threat, I think for my own part, that the greatest threat the world is facing is that of global warming. Nuclear weapons is also an enormous threat, but I think almost on par, but not quite. Global warming is a matter of 8 billion people. The nuclear weapons is a matter of a rather restrained number of people who could turn us around. So in the field to counter the global warming, we know also the role of the nuclear, which has come late in the knowledge of man. The search for knowledge goes back. I cited a while ago the Enlightenment in the 18th century, which I think was a very great period in the world's history, when they turned to research and to question a lot of things that were established dogma before that. And it also came at a time when facts could be disseminated. Printing was a great thing in the history of humanity that enabled us to spread and disseminate the knowledge that had been acquired. My idea, I confess to you, is Diderot, who lived during the French emancipation, and he belonged to the group called encyclopedists. It's difficult. Encyclopedia is easy, but encyclopedists are harder. Now, their creed, an idea was to collect data, to collect them, systematize them, and on the basis of the accumulation of data to draw their conclusion. Libraries, of course, are places where we used to store the data and accumulate them and draw them. Nowadays we have come beyond the libraries of books, and we are dealing with the computers and the collection of the computers, a collection of memories. And that's even more accessible. And when we have added to that the search systems, then we have come a very long way in the ability to draw on the collective and the accumulated knowledge of humanity. And that gives hope for every day. I think science advances, technology advances also very, very much faster than the past. We are taking quantum leaps forward. Now, my last point relates to energy and electricity. In rich countries, ample energy is taken for granted, although we know that it must be used with prudence. And that prudence sometimes, it seems to me, that those are the ones who feel the strongest for the preservation of the environment and the strongest against the risk of the global warming, are also sort of almost religiously, like a sect, going against energy. Because fossil fuels emit carbon dioxide, they turn against energy, not only against the carbon dioxide. And I think we have to keep our senses, we have to keep our common sense there. Engagement is fine, we need it to preserve the climate existence of humanity. And rational thinking is an indispensable part if we are to do it. And therefore my starting point is energy is not something that one should look down upon. Energy is a blessing, an enormous blessing. And let me cite the great Indian nuclear scientist Homi Bhabha, who said that no energy is more expensive than no energy. Well, he looked around in India and people carrying, mostly women, carrying heavy burdens on their heads and doing heavy chores. And he knew what energy would mean. Or I could take a more modern example. Lenin, he said that communism is Soviet power and electricity. Can you imagine? I don't agree with everything Paul Lenin said, but I think he found a good point there. The heavy lifting that was man's role long before energy came, that was much alleviated with the use of energy. First chemical energy and then the nuclear energy. It's also, I think we talked about, Agneta gave me a compliment for having joined the women in nuclear, and I'm certainly very much in favor of women's emancipation and not equality. And I would suggest to you that women's emancipation could have been a lot harder if we didn't have had the electricity. Think of the vacuum cleaners, the dishwashers, the laundry machines, the heating, the cooling. All these things have facilitated our living at home and thereby also liberated those who in those days carried much of that work. Today, even a man can do these things. What is needed? And I'm happy to say that, yes, that is done here. Now, nuclear, of course, is a prime source of electricity, extremely valuable from that point. But even regardless of the carbon dioxide, I would maintain that nuclear is a valid option for the generation of energy. And the broad development that's underway, and which I mentioned, the generation 3 and generation 4, these are hopeful things. They have to be further developed, and you have to watch. You have to watch to make it successful. We have to watch several things. One, of course, is economy. But the other, and the most important thing, is the safety. There are other things that are not so problematic. I think proliferation is not such a big thing. It's made up to be a big thing. But no nuclear bomb will be dismantled because you close a nuclear power plant, and that is well understood. The economics is a more important issue. That it's worth nuclear. Freedom of CO2 is certainly worth money, but nevertheless, the economics play a heavy role everywhere. I think the real objection, whatever your opponent's nuclear power present to us, the real objection lies in this scare of radiation. Something that you can't see, you can't hear, you can't smell, you can't touch. It makes it more scary, like a gas. It's also scary to people. And I think you have a role in explaining to people, to the public, the reality of radiation. Yes, it's a natural force. We know that if we lie in the sunshine too long, radiation can be harmful to us. We also know that we can handle radiation, that man is able to do that, we can use it for our benefit. It's important that you take part in the education of the public